I started to think about the idea and the figure, if you like, of the emancipated labourer. Emancipated, of course, in a double sense, that to some degree they have a job situation which is under their control as opposed to being controlled by capital. They have a livelihood which is kind of acceptable. They have living conditions which are reasonable. So you could say, I have a certain image of emancipation, which is emancipation from the travails of actually living and working under the domination of a capitalist mode of production. But I think emancipation also means something else. And I started to think about, well, the thing that probably would concern me a lot would be that people be emancipated in their conceptual apparatus, in the way they think, that they can actually see through all of the games and bourgeois tricks that get played, all of the ideological gambits that are around, all of the false promises which exist through advertising and all of the things that go on and through social media and so on. And that the emancipated labourer would be somebody who is emancipated in their heads and in their consciousness. And I was thinking to myself, well, if I wanted somebody to be emancipated of that sort, where would I begin if I was in a position to somehow or other instruct them on how to think about the world? There are these 5 points: the quality of life in the household, the nature of the labour market, how it's organised and how fair it is and all the rest of it, the experience in the workplace. Then there is the kind of experience as money manager, and then there's a person as a buyer in the market who then takes their stuff. So you have those 5 points, if you like. And so one of the things I would say to a working person is to say, think about the qualities of those 5 points and isolate for me 1 or 2 things in that whole circulation process which are most troublesome for you. Where's the point where you feel that there's most aggravating circumstances and something that you really would like to see cleared up and the like? And so at that point, the worker is in a situation of being able to address the conditions of their daily life. And instead of me coming along and saying, well, you should do this or you should do that, the emancipated labourer to think about the qualities of those different moments and their experience in those different moments, and where that experience needs something done to it to make it fairer, more acceptable, more useful, and more facilitative for you personally. So you would ask those questions. That point, it would seem to me, is the point where you start to say, well, I'm not in this alone. There are other people I see in the supermarket. There are other people I see in the bank. There are other people I'm seeing in the workplace. There are other people I'm seeing in the labour market. So you would then say, why not start talking to people about these separate different moments and ask that question so that everybody starts to think. And then collectively come up with an idea that we were going to have to try to push somehow or other some sort of regulatory practice so that all of this cheating which is going on in terms of mortgage originations and all of these scams which are going on, by asking this question, it seems to me, you start to define what is lacking and what kinds of things are lacking in the current society, the current situation. What I'm talking about here is not something exceptional, because in fact people often are doing this. One of the things that if you like, the pedagogy of the emancipated labourer would be trying to get people to think through what it is and what are the issues that most concern them. This may sound, and is, of course, incredibly reformist, and it's very small scale. But my point here is that this small scale is actually part of the process of organization building that has to be gone through. And things should always come back to the local level. That's one of the things that seems to me is really essential, is that what happens is that many of these ideas get put together and they become national kind of crusade. When it becomes a national issue, which it has to become at a certain point, planetary issue, if you like, at a certain point, even though they must do that, you should never, ever give up on the fact that questions which should be addressed at a global level come back to actually change the life of ordinary people in ordinary situations. So there are modes of action that people can do. And I'm not saying everybody should do that. What I'm saying is that there are examples of all kinds of possibilities, which are very hopeful in the sense that what they do is they start to actually create the ferment on the ground and a hopeful possibility